For nearly 3 millennia, the story of the Trojan War has captivated the Western world. It has all the elements of a perfect blockbuster: a relentless 10-year siege, impenetrable city walls, and a giant wooden horse that brought a mighty empire to its knees. We owe almost all of those vivid details to one ancient Greek poet, Homer. Sometime in the 8th century BCE, he composed the Iliad, cementing this epic clash of gods and mortals into our collective consciousness. For thousands of years after Homer wrote those words, academics and historians viewed the Iliad as a work of mythological fantasy. The superhuman heroes, the meddling gods, and the tragic deaths were treated as high-level fiction. Treating the text as a poem blinded the academic establishment to a tantalizing possibility. Buried beneath the meter and rhyme was a map to a real place, waiting for someone willing to read the myth as a literal set of directions. Heinrich Schliemann was a wealthy businessman who turned his fortune toward a lifelong obsession, proving Homer's geography was perfectly accurate. Schliemann operated on the premise that Homer's descriptions of massive stone walls and a city consumed by fire were literal, singular facts. If Troy existed, he reasoned, he could find it by digging until he hit the burn marks. In the 1870s, he set his sights on a hill in modern-day Turkey called Hisarlik. Schliemann employed brute physical force, aggressively tearing through delicate soil, ancient pottery, and fragile stone structures without a second thought for archaeological preservation. Deep in the earth, he hit a heavily fortified layer of ruins, scarred by intense fire, and packed with a cache of gold artifacts. He proudly declared to the world that he had uncovered Homeric Troy, naming this layer Troy II. His spectacular announcement made him famous, but it masked a devastating archaeological tragedy. Driven by hubris and impatience, Schliemann had committed a massive error in calculating the timeline of the ground beneath his feet. This wide panoramic view of the excavation site at Hisarlik reveals a unique geographical feature: an unusually steep hill jutting abruptly out of the surrounding flat Anatolian plain. This hill is what archaeologists call a tell. It is an artificial mound created by generations of people building, destroying, and rebuilding their cities on the exact same spot over millennia. This specific tell contains 9 distinct cities stacked vertically on top of one another. As the diagram shows, Schliemann's Troy II sits near the very bottom. This layer dates to the early Bronze Age, thousands of years before the Mycenaean Greeks could have ever sailed across the Aegean. To reach that bottom layer, Schliemann cut a massive trench straight down through the center of the mound. He plowed through the true late Bronze Age layers, Troy VI and Troy VII, obliterating the exact historical evidence he originally set out to find. By treating history like a race for buried treasure, Schliemann proved that a city existed exactly where Homer said it did, but he effectively ruined the crime scene in the process. It fell to Wilhelm Dorpfeld, a former assistant of Schliemann's, to clean up the site. He began carefully analyzing the upper strata that had survived the initial excavation. Only 2 layers actually align with the late Bronze Age: Troy VI and the city built immediately on top of its ruins, Troy VIIa. Troy VI matches Homer's steep and strong-built descriptions. The physical ruins show a wealthy, heavily fortified city, but the collapsed masonry indicates it was leveled by an earthquake rather than a Greek siege. Troy VIIa features different evidence: bronze arrowheads embedded in the streets, and widespread fire damage. However, this city fell during a period when the Mycenaean civilization was collapsing and too fractured to launch a unified armada. The physical evidence shatters the idea of a single, neat 10-year war, presenting a history far more complex and fragmented than the poem suggests. The coastal plain around Hisarlik sits at the intersection of the Aegean Sea and the Hellespont, offering a commanding view of the local waterways. Control over this vital economic hub led to repeated, localized skirmishes between Mycenaean and Hittite forces. These trade wars waged back and forth for generations. Over that same period, the local populations endured the sudden trauma of natural disasters, like the earthquake that leveled Troy VI. Without a written record, centuries of geopolitical strife and catastrophic earthquakes were passed down through oral tradition. The poets naturally condensed these complex events into a single narrative, where trade wars became a 10-year siege, and an earthquake became the wrath of Poseidon. The Iliad functions as a compressed cultural memory, preserving a core of physical truth within a masterpiece of oral tradition. These ruins at Hisarlik show how a real landscape can be transformed into an immortal epic.